Shadow of Truth with your host Dave Kranzler from investmentresearchdynamics.com. My name is Rory Hall, and I'm with thedailycoin.org. Today is Friday, February the 27th, 2015, and today we are going to cover the further deterioration of our economy, some recent comments by Alan Greenspan, and we're going to take a look at the gold and silver markets. How's it going today, Dave?
Not too bad. Getting abused by the weather here in Denver, but other than that, it's a happy Friday.
It is a happy Friday. Well, tell us about this ongoing deterioration.
Well, every day this week, most of the economic news that was released showed continuing weakness in the economy, and almost all of the reports came in well below what the Wall Street Brain Trust was looking for on a consensus basis. So, for instance, existing home sales on Monday, it basically dropped 5% from December to January, and that was on what they call a so-called seasonally adjusted basis. If you look at the unadjusted numbers for just the month of January versus December, which the NAR actually surprisingly reports, it showed a 32% drop from month to month. Now, there's definitely a seasonal factor in there for why, home sales always drop from December to January. However, in 2013, the drop was only 22%. And in last year, in 2014, the drop was only 26%. This was a 32% drop. And all four regions that the Fed measures, or not the Fed, the National Association of Realtors, where they get their data samples from, all four regions were down. And they can't blame it on the weather because California was down the most, or really the West. So you can't blame it on the weather.
Which they like to do.
Yeah, not only he didn't really say anything about the weather, he being the National Association of Realtors chief economist. He tried to blame it on low inventory. Well, guess what? As it turns out, December and January are always the lowest inventory periods of the year. And in 2014 of January, the inventory was basically the same as it was this year, measured in terms of month supply. And the inventory was even lower in January of 2013, which is when the December to January drop was only 22%. So he's full of horse hooey when he says it's due to low inventory. It's not due to low inventory. It's due to the fact that the first-time buyer is disappearing from the equation. And I'll have details about that in the article I'm preparing. It's due to the fact that the middle class in general has deteriorating levels of real monthly income. And the investment buyers are starting to fade in a big way. I mean, what they call the housing recovery, quote unquote, was really just investment buyers jumping in over the last few years, most of them, the institutional ones anyway, using basically free money. Government was giving most of these big funds that have been buying up blocks of distressed homes all over the place, especially in California and Florida and places like that. No one knows about this. I know about it because I looked it up. But they were able to get, if they bought homes from Fannie and Freddie, the government gave them 0% financing to buy those homes. So, and that's what fueled this quote unquote small bounce in sales that we've had in housing over the last 3 years. We're not even close to the level of sales that we had during the housing bubble years.
Do you ever look at the years between like 2002 and 2005? Have you done a comparison for that 3 year?
I'll have a graph in the article I'm preparing that shows that. So okay. that was when the housing bubble was really inflating. So it looks like we're headed back to a level of sales on an annual basis that was more akin to the 1990s, and I think we'll even go lower than that.
Wow.
Now, this is what was interesting. Everyone knows Case-Shiller puts out their famous or infamous housing price report every month, and there's a lot of issues with it, which I've highlighted before and discussed. And even Robert Shiller admits that it's not the best measure of housing prices. But a guy named David Blitzer, who's the managing director and chairman of the index committee at the S&P Dow Jones Indices, and that's the organization that now owns the Case-Shiller Index. This is what he said about the January existing home sales report. The housing recovery is faltering. While prices and sales of existing homes are close to normal, construction and new home sales remain weak. So for someone like that to admit that the housing recovery is quote unquote faltering, that means it's really bad. But every day reports came out that showed that were way worse than what were expected. And interestingly, Alan Greenspan was on CNBC yesterday, and I'm actually kind of shocked he said this, but he said, quote unquote, the way I measure it, it's probably tantamount to what we saw in the latter stages of the Great Depression. And he was talking about effective consumer demand. And he wasn't talking about just, the global economy. He's also specifically referring to this country. And I thought that was really interesting. And he's starting to lay out a lot of truth serum onto the marketplace. And I haven't decided if it's momentary lapses of senility when he sort of reverts back to the way he was when he wrote Golden Economic Freedom, or if he's out there trying to save his legacy by coming out and saying, because I always thought that when this country eventually hits the wall and collapses, that a lot of people would look back and blame it on Alan Greenspan. And I wasn't even sure he would live this long. I think what he's doing right now is trying to save his legacy by coming out and talking about how gold is the only true real money, and really reporting the truth about what's really going on in the economy. I mean, he's the only guy out there saying that. You won't get that out of Bernanke. In fact, Bernanke's disappeared. Completely. He's disappeared from the face of the earth. You're not going to get it from Grandma Yellen. You're certainly not going to get it from the White House. And you absolutely certainly will not get it from Wall Street.
Well, do you think that Greenspan could possibly be a spokesperson for the collapse, like Rickards is? I mean, in the same way?
I think Greenspan, if anything, I think he's out there trying to save his legacy, because I read an interesting historical accounting about Greenspan. But anyway, he was classmates with Henry Kissinger. And in fact, it was Henry Kissinger who saved Greenspan from economic ruin when he plucked him out of his failing econometric consulting practice, and put him into the Fed. And that's really how Alan Greenspan got his start. But someone had interviewed, I forget who wrote the article. I read it several years ago. The guy interviewed Kissinger, and Kissinger said, yeah, Greenspan was probably one of the brightest guys there, but he was always intent on proving how smart he was. And he said, his gang of people that he hung out with, Kissinger being one of them, would always kind of take advantage of that. Because he said he was just very, very insecure, and he always had to prove that he was the smartest in the class. And so that's why, flash forward to today, that's why I think he's out there working as diplomatically and as hard as he can to save his legacy, because he doesn't want to go down in ignominy, which is what I thought that would happen. I basically said, when the system collapses, people are going to look back and burn Greenspan's effigy. And then I said, I only hope he lives long enough to see the day. Well, guess what? He's out there covering his tracks up. He's a very bright guy.
Yes.
Contrary to Bernanke and Yellen and Volcker.
Well, and along those lines, I want to, on the Federal Reserve, that is, I want to read just a couple of very short passages from my friend Max Slavo over at shtfplan.com. And on the 26th, yesterday, he penned an article, "The Federal Reserve has unleashed a virus of radical monetary policy, and there's no going back." And in this article, he is referring to Janet Yellen. And he says, now Chairwoman Janet Yellen has testified before Congress that the Federal Reserve is looking to increase interest rates on the pretext of low inflation. The rate increase represents an enormous price-fixing mechanism that will alter the course of investments for everyone. And then this is directly from the source that he was referring to, and it's Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen said Wednesday that the central bank could raise interest rates before inflation picks up, as long as it foresees price increases accelerating and the job market continues to advance. And the housing markets that you were just talking about, I see deflation on the horizon. I may be wrong, probably am, but what do you make of that, Dave, as far as in light of Greenspan trying to save his legacy, in light of the housing market, which we know is tanking, the further deterioration of our economy? What are your thoughts?
Pure kabuki theater. They're
Okay.
not raising interest rates. In fact, Yellen said they're not raising interest rates this year. They can't raise interest rates, and they know it. Now, as far as the job market goes, we all know that's BS. They know it's BS too. The economy is losing jobs on a net basis. It's not gaining jobs. The government, the Census Bureaus or Bureau of Labor Statistics non-farm payroll report, it's pure Orwellian fraud, and everyone knows it. They're not raising interest rates. They're posturing as if they might, because the minute they flinch, the dollar is going to crash. It won't crash, but it's going to sell off hard. The only reason the Fed is even whispering that it might raise rates, I mean, it's been whispering that now for almost a year. It hasn't raised rates. The only reason they're whispering it out there is so that the market has a little bit of edge to it in order to support the dollar. Okay. They know the minute they raise rates, the system's going to tank.
Just belly up.
0% rates aren't going to help housing. It's not helping housing now. The country's in trouble, and they know it. And if anything, they just reported a negative CPI or PPI, whatever it was released earlier this week. Eventually, they're going to use that as an excuse to roll out QE4 in some form. And I don't know that it's going to be an outright, hey, this is QE4. They may find a creative way to start injecting more money into the system. I think they already have. It's just we're just not seeing it in the headlines.
Think they're backdooring it to the banks?
Well, I don't know if they're backdooring it, but it depends on how much you want to read into whether or not the financial statements released by the Fed every month, if they're fraudulent or not. But I mean, they never really even stopped QE3. They're still rolling principal and interest back into the market. It's a fair amount of money every month that's still being used to buy mortgages and treasuries.
Well,
so anyway, people don't need to worry about them raising interest rates. It's not going to happen. Okay. I mean, they really should raise interest rates, and they, start getting the proper economic policy and put into place, and maybe the system can be saved in time for everyone's children to enjoy life. But they're not raising rates, and the precious metals, they've been trying to smash the precious metals every day this week. And interestingly, every day they pop right back. So for instance, today, when I woke up this morning before the 6:30 economic farces were reported, silver was around 1653. They released the GDP revision, and they smashed silver into the low 1640s, and then shortly after that, it popped right back up to 1665. So
it's bouncing around 1656 right now.
Yeah, and so the point that I just want to make there is, and it's not there's not really, actually the futures right now are 1660. So the point is that really there wasn't any news triggers that caused the metals to bounce back. And when you see a market that sells off and then bounces back right away on no apparent news triggers, that's the sign that the next phase of this long-term gold and silver bull market are most likely getting started here.
Which sounds good to me. It's about time. When I introduced us today, Dave, I introduced us as Shadow of Truth. Shadow of Truth is a new collaborative effort by Dave and myself. And next Friday will be the official release of our first show. And that first show is going to include the commentary, just like what we have been presenting to you all. But there's going to be a twist in that we're going to invite a guest on at the end of the show who is going to present commentary on the topics that we have been discussing. And our first show is going to be Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Our second show will have Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show. And then our third show will have Rob Kirby of Kirby Analytics. And I am pretty stoked about everything, and I hope that you all tune in and keep tuning in, and we'll make it even better and better as we go along.
Wow, Rory, those sound like great guests you have lined up. Where can I listen to the show?
At Shadow of Truth on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search for Shadow of Truth, and please subscribe.
And just for everyone to know, we're going to try and ask these guys new and fresh questions and new and fresh opinions rather than just go over the same old material that's been kind of beaten into the ground.
Well, I mean, in that we're going to be topical for the moment because the show is going to be focused on the last 48 to 72 hours. The audience will get a great perspective from some really top-notch people from around the world because the topics will all be from the last 48 to 72 hours. So there shouldn't be any rehashing of old material.
Sounds great. I can't wait.
Well, Dave, is there anything else that we need to bring to the table?
Nothing I can think of. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much, and we will talk with you soon.